everybody. Welcome back to Ask a Trainer. For today, we're going to be covering separation anxiety, separation stress. I'll talk about what the difference between those two is. I picked this topic because I am hoping we will sometime soon be able to leave our houses again. But the downside to that is I think it's very likely that a lot of dogs are going to be struggling with this sudden schedule change. So if someone has been working from home or doing school from home and been home all the time for a year, and then all of a sudden people start leaving again, especially if it's for a whole work day, I think a lot of dogs are going to be really confused, and this could scare them. So dogs who already have a history with separation anxiety, I think this is like a really likely time for it to kind of pop back up when you have a schedule change, sort of big life change, and start leaving more. Or I'm also thinking about dogs who maybe haven't had this issue before, but especially dogs or puppies who have, like, let's say you got them during the pandemic, or many, dogs or puppies have only been alive during this pandemic. So I think there is a good number of puppies who maybe have never had somebody be completely out of the house for a full work day, and that's going to be a real shock to their system when that happens. So hopefully, like I said, we can be looking forward to this as something that is a fun and for everyone, including our pets. So now, looking forward to the future, now is probably a really good time to start working on some prevention or treatment tips now before you have to be leaving, and it's already an issue. So that's why we're talking about this today. Okay, so first I want to talk about what is separation anxiety, what does that mean, and sort of how do you know if that's something your dog has. Obviously, it has to do with being apart from you. So I do think the term separation anxiety gets very overused, and that can be confusing to, as the dog parent, trying to figure out how to treat it if you're accidentally treating the wrong thing, or you're not necessarily expressing what's happening quite accurately. So I thought it would be worthwhile to sort of define the terms. What are some things you could confuse it with? And just basically knowing that you're treating the right thing. So pretty much all of our dogs are going to prefer to be with us and would rather we not leave the house or always take them with us. That's very normal. Separation anxiety is a much higher level. It's a real panic. You can sort of think of it like a panic disorder that you might see in humans, where they aren't just, it's not just a preference. It's not, oh, I would prefer if you don't go, but if you do, I'll settle down and sleep until you get back. And then, of course, I'm excited to see you again. But it's a dog who is truly panicking when you leave them. Some obvious indicators to know this is separation anxiety and not something else are it starts as soon as you are getting ready to leave. So even before you have closed the door and left, you are seeing your dog starting to get nervous, seeing stress signals, maybe panting, pacing, clinging to you, not wanting you to go out the door, watching very closely when you do things like put on your shoes, pick up your keys, getting ready to go. You are already seeing them start to get upset before you have even left. That's one key indicator, is sort of the timing of it. It happens early. It happens as you're getting ready to leave. It really peaks right after you've left, like the instant you close that door. And often they stay panicking the whole time, or a huge amount of it that you're gone. So that looks really different from something like boredom, that often it can get confused for, which boredom, on the other hand, might be a dog that only has trouble if you're gone for a really long time. When you're getting ready to leave, they're interested, but they're not super, super vigilant about it. They're not showing a lot of distress. When you first leave, they're fine, they sleep. But if you're gone for, let's say you can be gone for an hour and your dog is fine, but if you're gone for 3, you come back and things are, they've started getting into mischief, that's very unlikely to be separation anxiety because they were fine in that early period. It's more like, oh, you're still not back. Well, I'll have to entertain myself. So if it's like you have a young dog who loves to chew and has lots of energy, needs lots of exercise, and it's only if you're gone for a longer time that you're having issues, not likely to be separation anxiety. Some other key factors are if they're doing destruction, doing damage, it's very specific aware. So separation anxiety is about, of course, being left, being separate from you. So you tend to see some very specific escaping behaviors, sort of trying to get out, getting out of the house or the confinement that they're in and trying to get to you. So your destruction is going to be focused around doors and windows, especially if it's the door you leave from. They might, tear up at the floor kind of right in front of the door that you leave. Escape behavior. Some dogs will even find incredible ways to get out. They will throw themselves through a window. That kind of thing. They are trying to get out of the house. Again, if you're seeing destruction, but it has very little to do, it's not around the door, it's not around the window, it doesn't happen all the time, it might not be as severe, it's more like I just went and chewed up a shoe, that's probably not separation anxiety. That's probably just, hey, no one was around and I wanted something to do. So it's about escaping, clawing at the door. You'll see, scratch marks, that sort of thing. So yeah, where is the destruction happening? When is their panicking happening? Those are some of, I think, the easiest ways to identify a real separation anxiety, which is about you being gone, and not just that they sort of need something to do. The last thing I think it can get confused with is just a house training issue. So people say to me pretty frequently, will say, oh, I think my dog has separation anxiety because they go to the bathroom when I'm gone. Are they? And then I can sometimes ask more questions and find out, well, if they're not showing any of this anxiety, they're not destroying things, they're not perfectly house trained when you're home, but they're close. There's certain patterns where it's like, oh, okay, this is more of they just need help at the house training issue. But frequently destruction and house training issues, if they're happening when you're gone, doesn't necessarily mean separation anxiety unless you're seeing these other things. A higher level of stress, it's severe, it's focused around where you leave and when you leave. Otherwise, you might just have a dog who needs a little more entertainment, who needs a little more enrichment. Maybe they need a specific thing to do when you're gone, things like that, or a little more work on kind of troubleshooting your potty training. So anyway, those are for another day, but I do think it's very helpful because you will be barking up the wrong tree, so to speak, if you are really worried about separation anxiety, but you have a destruction issue that has everything to do instead with your dog is just bored. You want to make sure you're putting your efforts in the right place. Okay, so, last but not least, I also use the term separation stress. So technically speaking, and this is not going to matter too much when you're just sort of discussing how to prevent this, how to deal with this, how to manage it, and kind of just talking amongst yourselves or thinking about how to deal with it. But it might matter if you're talking to a behaviorist, if you're talking to a vet, or you kind of, again, just there's can be an important distinction to help you know what you're dealing with. Separation anxiety is kind of considered like a more, it's a behavioral issue, sort of like a disorder, whereas separation stress might be a more normal, if you will, version of the same thing, which is I don't love it that you leave. I'm definitely upset about it. I need some help and work on it, but I'm not in an all-out panic. I would say this is kind of analogous to sort of in humans. It's like would be the difference between somebody who sometimes gets depressed, which is probably everyone alive, versus somebody having depression. So a lot of times people say, oh, my dog has separation anxiety. And when you dig in, it's like, they whine at the door for 5 minutes when you're gone, and then they go and go to sleep. Certainly that's still something that we want to address, and we want to make them comfortable and not even have those 5 minutes. However, that is really different from a dog who will bark for 6 hours straight or really injure themselves, breaking their teeth, biting to get out of a crate. So it does matter the severity. So separation stress is usually what I use, and I think is a commonly used phrase amongst trainers that sort of means more of that, like, the whining at the door, where I'm not thrilled that you're gone, but the dog is okay. Whereas a dog who's really, really, really upset, severe, this is sort of abnormal panicking behavior that truly needs help. That is what I'm referring to as separation anxiety. Obviously, I'm going to be talking about both. And if you were to do the things that treat and prevent separation anxiety, by all means, that's going to be way more than enough to help prevent or treat your separation stress. So both will work. But the reason I thought that was an important distinction also is because true separation anxiety really tends to frequently benefit from medication along with behavioral rehabilitation. That's a conversation to have with your vet, but there are a lot of different options, everything from kind of supplements to many different types of medications, dosages of medications, combinations, and the timing of it. It might be something that you use while you are doing your behavioral training process to kind of help lower their anxiety enough that you can make progress towards your goal and then wean back off. Maybe it's something you use all the time. Maybe it's something you just use for a short time or only use when you're gone. So tons and tons of different options, but that's another reason why it's important, I think, to distinguish true separation anxiety, because if your dog really has separation anxiety that's severe, it's absolutely worth, at the very least, a conversation with your veterinarian to talk about those options, understand them better, and see whether that can really, really help as a complement to your behavior work. Speaking of behavior work, obviously, let's get into that. So, there's a couple things that you can do. I'm going to talk about kind of the biggest overall strategy first, and then I'll go into, there's sort of some smaller things that are also helpful to do in addition to that. But your overall strategy for treating and preventing separation anxiety is something that I would say is simple but not easy. So what I mean by that is the concept of it is not crazily complicated. You can kind of understand it pretty quickly. But in terms of practically going through the process, the details are really important, and it's very easy to accidentally rush the process, kind of get the timing off, or if you sort of miss an important detail, it can not make the progress that you'd like. So I'm going to get into it and get into the details of how to make it work and how to make sure it's actually helping. But yeah, it's a simple concept, but you want to make sure you're not making some of these common mistakes that might be just a tiny tweak, but that makes all the difference between whether you're really getting to your goal or not. So the sort of simple concept is you want to only leave your dog for the amount of time that they're comfortable with before they are panicking. And then you want to build up those experiences. So put a lot of repetitions of these very brief separations or brief times being alone. Basically repeating those as long as the dog is calm and gradually extending them at a pace that they're comfortable with. So simple concept, but difficult to do for logistical reasons, as well as kind of understanding the behavioral nitty-gritty. So, meaning you might have to leave your house for a certain amount of time. Maybe your dog is literally only comfortable with you being gone for 2 seconds before they start freaking out. If that's the case, then you need to be working at 1 second intervals to start with. Obviously, we're going to build up from there. Of course, you might need to leave your house for more than 1 second. And that's why I say it's simple but not easy, because if you have a need to leave your house, you're going to need to have an interim management plan in place so that you are not undoing all the progress you did by practicing 500 1-second separations and then leaving your house for 3 hours. Your dog is in a panic state and you've sort of undone all of that progress. So yeah, so basically to back up a little bit, your rehabilitation, your treating of this problem could take weeks for a severe case, possibly even months. You absolutely can make huge progress on this, though, fortunately, and even really severe cases have been able to be, quote unquote, cured, to the point where it's managed. The person can live their normal life. They can leave their house, and the dog is okay. But it's important that the dog not be exposed to these experiences where they're panicking while you're gone, because every single time they have that experience, no matter how long it is, every time you close that door and they go into this fear, upset, stressed mode, that is such a negative experience for them that they're associating with you being gone. So they associate you being gone with feeling terrified, feeling stressed out, having no control. And the length of time doesn't really matter. It's the negativity of that experience is going to make them dislike being alone, and kind of keep them in that state of mind. So you really need to avoid them having that experience while you're going through this training process. So I would say budget out, which is a big reason why I'm doing this video now, hopefully a couple months before things sort of return to maybe a different, or change, I should say, to just a different schedule, because you have time now to make enough progress over the next month or two that your dog could be totally ready by the time you need to leave the house. What you probably don't want to do is never leave ever, then leave for 8 hours and you have no choice but to go to work, and your dog is horrified, and now it's very hard because you don't have this time period. So the first thing to do is, yeah, make a management plan for the times that you do have to leave your house. That's fine, but there's all sorts of different things you can do to make sure your dog isn't having these negative experiences while we're building up their tolerance to being left alone. So while let's say I'm going to budget out, I'm going to say, okay, my dog has separation anxiety. It's not too severe, but it definitely exists. I'm going to say I'm going to hire a pet sitter for 1 month, while I work on this, and make sure that, the once a week that I need to leave for a few hours, that pet sitter comes over at that time. In the meanwhile, over all these weeks, I'm doing these exercises to where I'm helping my dog get to the goal of where I can leave eventually. But in that meantime, I'm not accidentally undoing my progress by having them panic while I'm gone too long. So there's, daycares, pet sitters, dog walkers, friends, neighbors. They can go to your friends. The dog can go to someone else's house. Someone can come to your house. Whatever you have to do, figure out some sort of plan so that they're not left alone for longer than they're ready for, while we're getting them ready to be left alone for longer. Okay, so I know that can be really logistically difficult, which is one of the reasons that separation anxiety can be very tough, because if you have 2 months where you never have to leave your house and you can gradually build up this time, great. But most of the time, in years other than this, that's not a luxury that a lot of people have. So it can be logistically difficult to figure out, but I definitely recommend, ask family, ask friends, ask neighbors. Maybe you can do some sort of daycare exchange, like, hey, I'm home on the weekends and I would be happy to watch your dog those days or walk them or whatever. And I'm gone, Tuesdays and Thursdays. Can my dog go to your place then? Whatever you have to do. Again, it's not necessarily forever. It might even only be for a few weeks, a few months, something to kind of get us over that hump. Okay, so when I say while we're working on it, let's talk about the real bread and butter of that, the real how do we work on this. So like I said, we're going to start with small separations that feel okay and safe to your dog. Repeating those, it's going to be the opposite of that negative experience. So think of it kind of like, I picture a little piggy bank, and you're making a little deposit in that. Every single experience your dog has with you leaving, even if it is for half of a second where they feel okay, is one more deposit in that bank where they are growing more confident about you being gone. So the more you repeat these kind of short, safe feeling separations or leaving the pup, um, the more deposits you have in that bank, so the more trust you've built up, the more confidence you've built up that you can start to expand on them. So that's going to be your foundation, so do not skimp on them. I recommend literally starting inside your house. Do not even leave your house yet. Go into another room. For many dogs with separation anxiety, sometimes people kind of affectionately call them Velcro dogs, meaning if they're laying on the couch with you in one room and you get up and go to your kitchen, they are with you. If you go to the bathroom, they are with you. They don't just stay there and wait for you to come back. Some do, and that's great. That might mean they're actually even a little further along. But the point of this is many dogs with separation anxiety are worried about literally even having you out of their sight. So if you going into another room is a little bit stressful for them, you want to start there before you're leaving the house, which is very likely a trigger for them to mean, oh, you're going to be gone longer. This is what I'm really worried about. So starting inside the house gives you like a little more wiggle room where they're usually a little less worried about it. You can start to make some real progress there that will then translate once you start leaving the house. So, there is really like no way to do too short of a time to start out. I think we humans, it's just very, very natural. We like to rush things. We want to make progress. We want to get to our goal. But let me encourage you and just sort of reframe it for you that the bulk of the work you're doing is going to be building up from about like 0 seconds being left alone to maybe about 15 minutes. Once you get there, it starts flying. That is like the hardest part. Just kind of like walking, the first step is always the hardest and the biggest deal, and it takes a while to build up and get there. Once you've got 1, it's not so hard to get 2. Then you can get 4, then you get 8, and before you know it, that starts moving really quickly. So I just mentioned that because it can feel really daunting if I'm talking about literal seconds and saying you might start with 1 second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds. That can feel like this is going to take 500 years, but it doesn't, because you're starting with seconds, then you move to a minute, from a minute you move to 2 minutes, 2 minutes to 5 minutes, 5 to 10, and you've done most of the work by the time you're at 15 minutes. It's not as though you need to do 1 hour, 1 hour and 1 minute, 1 hour and 2, not at all. If you can be gone for an hour, and your dog is relaxed, they're not stressed out, they're not panicking, you've built up to that, chances are they're going to fall asleep at that point, and then they don't care that much if they take a 2-hour nap, a 3-hour nap. You can kind of build it up much more from there. So I just say this to keep you from getting discouraged about what small increments I'm talking about, and to sort of encourage you to really take your time. Do more repetitions than you think you need to do at a shorter time interval than you think you need to do. So if you think your dog is going to be okay for 1 minute, start at 30 seconds. If you know your dog is going to start panicking right away, I want it to be literally instantaneous. So what you're doing is just leaving the room at first, and I would close the door. But you want to have left the room and come back before there is any possible chance of your dog even noticing, let alone panicking. So I am literally as though I'm going to the bathroom, that casual, totally just very neutral, stand up, walk into the bathroom, close the door, open it, walk right back out, that fast. Like, I'm not even pausing. I'm not standing in the bathroom. I just, as though me opening and closing this door means nothing. Me moving between rooms means nothing. It's something I do all the time. It's nothing to be worried about. And you really don't want to waste your energy hopping off the couch to come see what I'm doing every time. So pay attention to your dog. Did they not notice at all, not care, keep resting on the couch? Or, when you close that door, were they watching your every move, seeing what you were doing, already getting up to come over? That kind of lets you know, like, how far you have to go and sort of what your baseline for starting out is. So if they're in that second group, that's fine. That's kind of what I'm expecting for a separation anxiety case. That just lets you know you don't want to be pushing it much further. Then watch until they move from that second group to that first group, meaning as many times as it takes, get up, walk in the bathroom, close the door, open the door, walk right back out. Repeat that as many times as you have to until they are like, whatever, weird, they're like, I'm not bothering with this. Mom just does that, my dad just walks in the kitchen 25 times a day and then walks right back. Who cares? Where they're feeling so neutral about it, so relaxed about it that they're not watching your every move, that's when you know they're ready to move on. And they are making progress. So step one is that literally just in another room, I would close a door, but for so short that my hand doesn't even leave the handle, like close, open, right back out. Once they are relaxed about you doing that, you're not seeing stress, you're not seeing them staring at you. They're not getting up to move from where they are. They're not crying. They're not scratching at that door. Now you're ready to close the door, wait behind it for a few seconds, very, very, very brief. Same thing where if you are hearing them cry, if you're hearing them get up, if they're coming over to the door, if they seem worried, if they're doing any stress behaviors, it's already too long. If you're not seeing any of that, you're seeing the same reaction as when you open and close it, where they're like, whatever, they've learned that this is something normal, that's nothing to be worried about. Good, then keep going. So you're just going to build up from there. But I spend the longest time going from first, really no pause at all. I'm just practicing the idea of I'm behind a door just for one instant, just to give them the idea that this is something that happens. I walk in another room and you don't see me just for a second. I come right back. Nothing bad happens and it's nothing to worry about. Once they've kind of got that idea, maybe I am, in the other room for just a few seconds. And same thing, I come right back out. I don't make a big deal of it. I want them to feel like this is nothing to worry about. It's just a normal part of life. Certainly, I'm going to start building up as the dog shows me they're ready. So basically, when they look like they don't care, whatever weird, they're like, whatever weird thing you're doing, running back and forth between rooms, they're like, have fun. I'm relaxing here. When I see that, that lets me know it's okay to move on to my next step. So each next step is just increasing duration. So I'm going to go to a few seconds. I'm going to try to get to 10 seconds, 30 seconds, and so on and so forth. A minute, maybe 2 minutes. From there, I go to 5. Usually from there, I can go to 10. So, but certainly always the dog sets the pace. So if I just did 5 minutes and they did great, and I think, great, I'm going to do 10, but they're starting to whine and cry at 7, then they weren't ready for 10. And I'm going to stop the exercise there and go back a step. So pick up on their cues, pay attention. One tip I absolutely strongly recommend is to literally use a timer, because I have just found from experience, it is so much harder to estimate the time than you think it is. Even if you are counting to yourself, like, you might not be being consistent between what you think 10 seconds is. And that's one of those details I mentioned up top about, like, where I said simple but not easy, because something as small as that could be you're actually extending it more than you mean to, without using your timer, and the dog wasn't quite ready for that. So you're not in that sweet spot of progress, which is like, it's just enough that you're back before they're worried, but you're increasing the amount of time. That's going to be the most important in these early stages, when you're talking about a matter of minutes or a matter of seconds, and you don't want to accidentally go over. And you also can't tell if you're making progress unless you have, okay, we did 4 minutes 10 times and the dog was fine. Great. Now I can do 6 minutes and they were fine. Great. If you're not doing the amount of time you think you are, how do you know if they're improving? So I really, really recommend using a timer. I know it kind of feels silly to like sit there with your stopwatch for 5 seconds, but I think it's very, very useful. And sometimes you can feel like you've been especially if you're just standing in the bathroom waiting behind the door, it's going to feel like forever, and it might have been 15 seconds. So you might think like, oh, they're great, they're ready for much longer, and you might be vastly over or underestimating the time. So using a timer helps a lot. I just use the one on my phone. Start inside the house. We talked about that. Yeah, like I said, I've already said this, but I think it's just where the most mistakes or kind of confusion happens. So I'll just say it one more time, which is you really can't do too many repetitions at an easy level, and you can't really make the level too easy, because think back to that piggy bank. It's like you want as much in your positive or neutral experience. You want to make as many deposits as you can so that that bank is nice and full. And that's going to buy you more leeway up in these more difficult levels. So even if it's very easy for your dog to have you be gone for 10 seconds, or let's say it's really easy for you to be, go take a shower and you're in the other room, but it's very hard for them once you actually leave the house, I think it's still really worthwhile to start at that easier level, because you're making this foundation of confidence where they're understanding the concept. You're not always accessible to me. Maybe I can hear you, but I can't see you. I still know you're there, but getting used to the idea that it's okay if you're not right next to me and nothing bad happens. The more of that they have, the easier it's going to be when you move to a higher level. Once you can, be in the other room and they aren't super worried about it, you can close the door, try different doors of your house. Don't just do one, make sure you can go to the bedroom, go to the bathroom, go to the living room, upstairs, whatever, different rooms of your house so that they are used to this idea in general. I disappear wherever, I come back, no problem. Once you can do that and stay in any of the different rooms for, I would say, at least 15 minutes without them worrying. But again, ideally, if they can do 15 minutes, usually by then they kind of start to relax, and you're kind of past that like key separation panic moment. So usually once you get there, you don't have to worry quite as much about the precision of the timing. But yeah, you should be able to go in the other room and they're not worried about it. Once you can do that, start with your outside door and bring the time all the way back. So if your dog can if you can now be in another room for any length of time without them caring, I mean, let's just say hypothetically, you could be in your bedroom for an hour with the door closed and they're fine. I would literally go back to 1 second when you go out your garage door, just to start with. Again, we're going to build up the exact same way you did, but it should go faster if you've already done this progress, or done this process inside. So, you don't, it won't take forever, I promise. But you do want to start back at the beginning so that you don't, the reason for that is so that you don't accidentally do too much. A good way to think about it is that the door to the outside, they associate with you actually leaving, versus they might not love not seeing you, but they know when you're still home. So it's already harder. Anytime you turn a one difficulty level up, you want to turn something else down so you're not accidentally making it too hard too fast. So if the outside door is harder than a door inside the house, then you don't want to do the same length of time or keep increasing the time, because now you've lost that window that they are okay with. On the other hand, I know moving to outside is a bigger deal, so I'm going to make it a smaller time increment, and that's going to make it doable again. Now I have, sometimes I'll say it's like the first push-up. If you can't get one push-up, it's really, really hard to make progress, because where to even start? If you can do one, you can start working towards two, and so on and so on and so forth. I can't do any push-ups, by the way, but like I said, that's the hardest part, getting off of zero. But anyway, that's a tangent. Point being, once you have a starting point, you're good to go. The hardest part is finding that starting point. So yeah, so now move to outside, but you might be standing right outside your front door, and same as we did at the beginning. Close the front door, open it, walk right back in. There is no chance for them to destroy something, get upset, whine, cry, brighten. There's no chance for them to practice any of that, because you have opened the door as soon as you closed it and walked back in. Same exact process I already talked about earlier when we first started. Now you're just doing it outside. After you can stand outside the door, and you're sort of like listening and watching so that you'll hear if they're barking, you'll hear if they're scratching. None of that's happening. They seem fine. If you walk back in, they're still kind of settled and relaxed. They're not super upset. Now you're ready to just start, again, increasing your time and your distance a little bit. So usually I go from standing outside the door to walking to the mailbox. I go to the mailbox, I come back, and I make sure to do that a few times a day. It's like basically get your mail 10 times a day. I leave, I come back, it's no problem. It takes a couple minutes, if that, and it starts to give them this pattern and this practice that when someone leaves out that door, they're not automatically gone for super long. It doesn't always mean that I need to be upset or scared and I'm abandoned. None of that. It's like no big deal. If you can do your mailbox comfortably, start taking a really short walk. I do recommend having some way to make sure that they're not super upset. So you could, there's some like apps, really easy apps that you can put on your phone or your computer where you can basically just leave a little webcam or a sound detector, something, so that if your dog is at home freaking out, you can of course come right back. But I think the easiest way to do it is just you have built up enough time outside the door that they're okay for so many minutes. The other thing is it's going to be very clear when you come home whether they're okay or not. So if you come home and they're covered in drool and they're panting and they're pacing and they are at your door, obviously that was too long. The other, my personal go-to is I do so many short repetitions where I know they're okay. I'm not pushing it, so they never really get that chance to panic because I'm coming back in a time frame where I know they're still going to be okay. And only when I've seen that really consistently, I did 5 minutes 10 times, and at this point they could care less. They're zonked out on the couch. They're not even looking at me. If I'm seeing that and I move to 6 minutes, I would, of course they're still going to be fine. So just going slowly enough is pretty much all you need to do to guarantee they'll be okay. But by all means, pay attention to what they have done when you come back. If they have, it'll be easy to see if they were upset, if they have gotten into something, if they have whatever, versus if they haven't moved from where you left them. So yeah, from there, like I said, you're really, really, really focusing on those first few minutes. I would say usually I tell people like my first big goal is 15 minutes. Usually from there you're close to good, but I would say definitely you're good if you can do an hour. So don't panic about, oh my gosh, but I have to leave for 6 hours and 1 hour is so different from that and I'll never get there. Don't worry. If you can do 1 hour, it is like the next step from there is 2 hours, and do that a few times, and then you can probably do 3, 4, 5, and 6 pretty quickly. So don't worry about like that further along steps because they go much more quickly. So I would say put the most effort into those early stages. If you can get to 15 minutes, you've done by far the majority of the work. But I would say to prove it, to kind of make sure, I wouldn't do 15 minutes and then leave for 5 hours. I would make sure you can kind of gradually build up to an hour, checking back on them or having like your phone where you can see them, knowing that they're okay. Practice at that level, but then you're kind of good to go. Let's see. I think I did have one other thing. Okay, so not quite last, but close to it. Another thing to think about, if you remember at the very beginning of this video, I talked about how your dogs with separation anxiety are upset before you have even left, before you are even separated. They know the pattern of your departure. So if you put on your shoes, put on your coat, pick up your keys, fill a water bottle, they will notice every single one of those details and pick up on those cues that means you're about to leave, and they're going to start getting upset at all of those things. One way to really help with this that actually will help with your separation anxiety overall because they have less time to build up to this fever pitch, and you're lowering the baseline that they're starting at, is to take away the meaning and the stress of those departure cues, those kind of signs that you're going to leave. In other words, if I only ever pick up my keys when I am leaving the house, then picking up my keys is a sign to my dog to start panicking. So what I'm going to do is pick up my keys, put them down 100 times a day, and one time a week it means I'm leaving. That's going to disrupt the pattern so much. Do all of the things that you do when you leave without actually leaving, and do them. Basically, you want it to seem totally random. So it's like sometimes I put on my shoes and then I go sit in the living room. Sometimes I pick up my keys and I do that all the time, and it doesn't mean that I'm driving anywhere. Sometimes I walk to the car, put something in it, and walk right back. And kind of try to pay attention, like notice when you do leave for real, because you might not even think of some of the things you do when you're leaving that your dog is astute enough to pick up on, and make sure that you practice all of them. It's really, really simple. It's just, it feels very silly, but it will help a lot of putting on shoes, putting on coat, take it back off, or put it on and, walk around for a minute. Basically, you just want those signals to stop being a one-to-one obvious sign of every time I pick this up, I leave, so they know what that means. On the other hand, if I pick this up, put it down, it's very random. Sometimes I put on my coat and my shoes, and then I just do it, whatever. Point being, if those things no longer have meaning, then your dog isn't already, if it takes you 15 minutes to get ready and they are stressed and anxious and more so the entire time leading up to you leaving, then by the time you leave, it is so little room for them to go all the way to a panic. If you pick up their keys and that means nothing to them, you put your shoes on and they're like, my mom's obsessed with putting her shoes on. I don't know. Who cares? Humans are weird. And they're not worried about it. Now you can do your departure routine and they aren't even getting anxious at all until that door is closed. You may have just, shaved off a big portion of their anxiety so that they're no longer starting up here and getting all the way to panic. Maybe they're starting down here at a completely neutral, and that even if they get more upset, they're not going to escalate so much, and you have a longer window from which you can get back. Because that clock may have started the second you put on, maybe you only wear sweatpants in the house, no judgment, and you put on your jeans and your dog is like, I know what this means. So then maybe it takes you 20 minutes to do the rest of your things and kind of leisurely getting ready to go, but your dog has been starting to slowly panic for 20 minutes. So you're starting your clock way further if you have practiced those departure cues not meaning anything, not necessarily meaning the departure, because the clock doesn't just start when you close the door. So you may now have a much longer window to be gone where they're still okay, which is going to help you make progress towards that goal of however long you actually have to be gone. Oh, I've got comments. Okay, let me look at these. Let me look at these comments or questions on here and see if I can answer those. And then I had maybe one more thing. And let's see. Being alone, having to go shopping. Because they're giving too much. Okay, so this question says, being alone and having to go shopping, doctor, etc. when I have to go somewhere. Is there giving too much to try to keep her busy in her crate? So I'm not 100% sure what you mean giving too much. I'm guessing you're asking about, leaving the dog in the crate for kind of those short, like, errands trips. Crate, basically, crate or no crate, it's the same exact concept of if your dog is panicked about you being gone, they're going to panic whether they're in a crate and try to escape that and potentially hurt themselves, or they're going to panic out of it and be doing it at the door. If, on the other hand, they're okay with you being gone, whatever length of time they're okay with, they should be okay in or out of the crate, if that makes sense. So you don't necessarily have to crate train to help separation anxiety. And also, you want to think of your crate training as a separate thing, but the concept is exactly the same, which is you want your crate just like you want your other room in your house or wherever you keep the dog when you're gone to be kind of this safe, comfortable space that you've gradually built up time for them staying in. And yes, it absolutely helps to have them have something to do. So either way, whether they're in the crate or out of it, whether they're confined to one room in the house or totally free roaming, giving them something they can do is going to help kind of prevent your other destructive behaviors and sort of keep them busy. It's also a good way to make you being gone a more positive experience. So that will prevent your separation anxiety and kind of help it if you've made enough progress that they're not in a full-on panic. Because if they're fully panicked, they will ignore the treats or toys you give them. They're too busy trying to escape. They're way too afraid to do something like that. If they're not that level, you've made enough progress where like they don't love you being gone, but they will eat the Kong if you give it to them. Then yes, by all means give them one because it might get them over that 15-minute hump. Oh, I'm playing with my puzzle, my like treat ball. They play with that for 15 minutes, then they've fallen asleep, and then you're back. So that's a fantastic way to get them over the hump. And they might be like, gee, I can't wait for you to actually finally get out of this house so I can get that special chew toy that I only get in my crate when you're gone. That's going to make them feel more positive about the experience of you being gone. So no, it's definitely not giving too much to give them something to do in the crate, but just same idea as with building up leaving. You also don't want to leave your dog in the crate for longer than they're okay with, but that's kind of its own thing with crate training. But same idea. If they're comfortable and happy in the crate, by all means give them good things in there to keep them comfortable and happy in there, or outside of it as well. But yes, kind of either way, giving them something to do is helpful, but it's only helpful if they're not, if you've made enough progress, or if your dog is one of these dogs that has separation stress and not separation anxiety, where they're a little bit upset, they're a little bit bored, but they're not losing their minds. That dog may be very happy eating an enrichment treat or playing with a toy or doing some of those things while you're gone, and that can be very helpful. But if you have a dog who's panicking that you're gone, giving them a Kong is not going to be enough because they probably won't even eat it. Let's see, and then a just reading this comment. So I guess I should read it out loud so you know what I'm answering. It says, Indy will have kind of a moment of panic, non-destructive, when we initially leave the house, but she'll settle in after about 5 minutes. Okay. So that's interesting. Yeah, that is a little bit different, but definitely not unheard of. Will starting back over with smaller increments help her with those first minutes? Yes. Yes, absolutely. If this is your dog, if that's kind of what I was talking about at the beginning of, like, that separation stress. It's more common, it's less severe, you can kind of get away with it, but obviously, you know, everyone feels bad, and it can potentially get worse because they're having such a bad time, they're having such a negative experience in those few minutes, that it's possible they can start really dreading you leaving just because of how bad it feels to them inside during those 5 minutes. So it is 100% worthwhile and probably pretty easy to do because that's such a short time frame, and it's a really positive sign that she does settle on her own. That tells you she's got a great skill. She is okay with you being gone. She certainly just doesn't love it at first. That tells me you don't have a ton of work to do, and I think your goal is really, really reachable, but I would absolutely recommend if it takes her 5 minutes to settle, I would build up to those 5 minutes. And then now your goal isn't 15 minutes or an hour, your goal is 5 minutes. So that's relatively easy, but I would do the same thing. I would start at 1 second, 5 seconds, 10 seconds, gradually building up, and see if you can kind of push back that panic a little bit. For her, it might help to do kind of combining those two questions. If she's not so upset, she's not destroying stuff, but she's upset in those first few minutes, she might be in that range I was talking about, where giving her a Kong might help. Giving her, a frozen treat, giving her a special toy, whatever it is that she really likes, because if it can only occupy her for a few minutes, that's bought you almost the whole time she needs to settle down. But yes, I would do like a 1 minute. I would probably, again, start at a few seconds, but I would do, 20 times, leaving her for 1 minute with a treat. And she's going to be like, yeah, leave me alone with my treat for 1 minute. This is great. Once you've done that, 2 minutes, and then getting to 5 should be like no big deal at all. And now you'll have skipped that little panic and she'll settle as soon as you leave. Okay, also we have an indoor security camera we can speak through. Do you suggest using those so she can hear our voice to soothe? Oh, that's that's such a good question. So, my short answer is it depends. And so I would say try it and see what she does. It depends, because some dogs seem to really get it, understand hearing your voice, and they like it. Others are going to be kind of confused, or it might like wake them up, startle them. So one, I would say it's worth a try. And this actually brings me a bit back to my the last thing I wanted to say. So thank you for that question. It was perfect. Which is, there is a distinction. You're going to treat it a lot the same way, but it is a good thing to keep in mind, which there's a distinction between dogs who are very, very attached to one handler, or a set of handlers, like maybe like they're 2 family members and they hate being apart from that person or those couple people, versus a dog who hates being by themselves. So meaning, it's kind of the difference between, this is just a phrase I use, but I think of it as the difference between separation anxiety and stress, or like isolation anxiety and distress. So the reason this matters is because, let's say, if you have a dog who just hates to be alone, then there's actually a lot more you can do. You have way bigger set of options and things that are helpful for that dog to help them not feel alone, just not feel like they're by themselves. They might enjoy having another animal, having another companion. That dog might be even fine just having another dog. They might be fine having the radio on, the TV on. And for a dog like that, they just don't want to feel like they're by themselves, like they're, abandoned. Oh my gosh. If that's their issue, then talking them through that security camera, they'll love that. Yes, I would definitely recommend that. For some dogs, it's not about being by themselves. It's about, I don't want to be separated from this one person who is like by everything. So for those dogs, it doesn't help at all to have another dog. And it might not even have, I've heard plenty of cases like this where you might even have 2 people in the home. One of them stays home, but their person leaves the house, and they're panicking. They don't even care that second person is at the house with them. So that's important, because radio is not going to help. TV is not going to help. Much harder. Talking to them would probably make them more upset because they hear you but can't get to you. And in that case, the only way to fix that is to go through these like practices of separation with the specific person or persons who they're super attached to. I didn't mean for that to be a tangent, but I think that that is important and can be confusing, because there's a lot of tips for separation anxiety that will only work if they're in the category that they just don't want to be alone, and not the category of I cannot be apart from this one person, because then nothing else will really substitute for that. I also think that's important because I think it's pretty common advice that is definitely not my first go-to. It might help in some cases, but definitely not all, which is a lot of times people will say, you have to get them another dog. They want another dog. I can't tell you how many times someone has ended up, coming to me because they had a dog with separation anxiety. So they're like, well, I got my dog, another dog, and now dog 2 has all these problems. Dog 1 was already an anxious mess, and now they're dealing with the stress of change and sharing me and this other dog in the house, and now the people are like completely overwhelmed and you have 2 crazy dogs. So it's definitely not like my first go-to, but it's worth doing a little exploring. So I would say, like, more specifically to your question, use this, use your voice thing, talk to the dog and see what happens. Obviously I would test it when you're right outside the door, so that if she freaks out and she's really upset, you can walk right back in. Okay, we won't do that again. If they seem to like it and that's really soothing to them, you could do that. You could also make a recording of your voice. You also might be able to do something. I bet a dog like that would also be happy having some music playing, having, I keep saying the radio on. I guess people don't really have radios anymore, but the radio equivalent, something, some music or TV's kind of background noise that just makes them feel like they're not alone. And yeah, definitely try to distinguish which of those issues your dog's having, because a lot of things works better for one or the other. So yeah, for instance, it might really help to have another dog over. But I would test that theory before you go adopting another dog. I would pet sit. I would have your friend's dog over. I would make sure your dog even likes other dogs. I would, do some of these things to try to zero in on what your dog's specific needs are before getting another one. Okay, I think those are the questions. I did want to touch on that getting another dog thing, because that is a very common suggestion. It will help in some cases, but definitely not all. And it's very common, not always, but it's just common that dogs with separation anxiety have maybe some other anxieties, maybe are a little more anxious in general. Not always. Some dogs are happy-go-lucky, relaxed as can be, except for this one issue. It's just, it's one of those things. It's more likely, it's frequent that a dog with separation anxiety maybe is a little more worried about things in general, and that's a dog who I would be very cautious and thoughtful about adding another family member of any kind, or adding another dog, because change might be extra stress for them, and that might not be helpful at all. It could be, it's something worth exploring and thinking about this particular dog's needs more closely. I think that also might be a relief for some people to hear, because I've heard some people, I think, worried, like, maybe they are not necessarily ready or wanting another dog and feeling like they have to get one because of separation anxiety. You don't. You can fix it these other ways. If you want another dog too, that's wonderful. Get one from Paws Forever. But by no means is that like the first go-to or a completely necessary thing. Okay, so really quick recap. Basically, separation anxiety is that specific term means your dog panics when you leave them home alone, and they're going to need help to feel safe and realize that you are coming back. You're always coming back. Nothing bad is going to happen to them. They don't have to come find you. They don't have to escape. They don't have to panic. You will be back. Many dogs have a less severe version of this. Maybe even most dogs have a kind of the less severe version of this, which is some amount of separation stress, which is, I'm a little upset that you leave, but I can settle myself. Or, I'd certainly prefer that you not go to work all day. I'd much rather you stay home and play with me. But I am, they're not at this level of panic. When they do have, if your dog does have sort of this first case, a more serious case of actual separation anxiety, definitely first thing to do, or among the first things I would do, would be to talk to your vet about medication options. That goes back to that thing I was saying a few minutes ago, that it also is frequently comorbidity to have separation anxiety and other anxieties. So if your dog is kind of worried all the time, and this is one of their big triggers, helping them feel a little calmer all the time is going to start you out at a more successful place. So discuss those options with your vet. Let's see. Your overall strategy for fixing it is just making it very normal and very neutral or positive, but basically feeling like it's no big deal at all for you to be apart from them. You can start very simple with literally starting inside your house, practicing super simple Stays. Practice stays where your dog stays, you know, in a sit just a couple feet from you for just a couple seconds. Start rewarding that. And you can also practice things like going in other rooms, closing doors, and coming right back before they're upset, gradually increasing the amount of time, and eventually moving to your outside doors where you're actually leaving the house but coming back before they're worried, even if it's literally instantly. And same thing, gradually increasing the time until you get to the goal that you need. You don't want to leave them for longer than they're ready for before you have gotten there in your practice. So set aside, you know, budget some time that you're going to be working on this, and have a plan in that time for either an emergency when you have to leave that it's unplanned for. You know, have a buddy system, to find someone else who you can watch their dog, they can watch yours, friend, family member, neighbor, whatever, where if you have to leave, or certainly a planned one, let's say you're gone every Friday night for 2 hours, you want to make sure that someone is with your dog, or you have some, or maybe you take them with you depending on where you're going, something where they're not doing more than they're ready for. And last but not least, practice your departure cues and make them become random things. Departure cues is anything that lets your dog know you're going to be leaving. So the pattern that you do before you leave, try to make that not an obvious pattern. If you always put on your shoes, put on your coat, pick up your keys in that order, start doing it in a different order, start doing it at different times a day when you don't leave. You know, do 2 of the 3, do 1 of the 3, do all 3 of the 3, so that it seems so random and so meaningless to your dog that they're no longer upset when you do those cues. And that is going to help you be able to leave for longer while you're practicing building up their confidence with you leaving. So, okay, by all means, let me know if you have questions. There is a book I really like that's very short. I think you can get it online for just a few dollars, like an online version or a physical copy. But I'll Be Home Soon, it's called. That basically goes over what I just said, but it gives some pretty clear, like, step-by-steps about, like, how many seconds to do, when to move forward, how many repetitions to do. So if you are going through this process and it would be helpful to you to have kind of it written out, I love that book, and it's a very quick, very accessible read. So it's pretty detailed info, but in, you know, a book this big. So I definitely recommend that. If you're having this issue, I definitely have more articles, more books and things. If this is an issue you have, by all means, reach out. You could comment, you can email me, you can email Train at Pause Forever, you can email Melanie at pauseforever.org if you've got this issue, and I can send you resources and kind of guide you through it if you would like. So yeah, I would recommend to anyone who's going to have a schedule change for any reason, but I imagine many of us are in the hopefully not too distant future going to be leaving our houses a lot more. So before that happens, it's a great idea just to do a little bit of practice. Like, let's say your dog has not had separation anxiety, but you just want to make sure they don't develop it because it's such a sudden change for you to all of a sudden be leaving, then it's a great idea to do some small parts of this, of like going and getting the mail, going for short walks. You don't want to stay home all day, every day, for days and days and days and days and weeks and weeks and weeks, and then suddenly leave. Of course that's going to panic them, because that's so different. They're going to think, you know, something's wrong, something has happened to you. So it's a really good idea for your dog to be used to these really minor departures. You don't have to even go anywhere. You can drive around the block and come home. You can, you know, whatever, do a little errand so that they're kind of used to this before you're ready to start leaving the house more. So definitely recommend practicing that. Let me know if you have any questions, and otherwise I'll be back with answering different questions and different topics next month. So see you guys then. Thanks so much for tuning in. Bye, guys. Oh, where's the button?